Entropy is just a fancy word for disorder. There's always increasing disorder of matter and energy in the universe. That's why we don't have perpetual motion, and why we don't live forever, and why the stars, all the stars in the universe are burning out. They're giving off energy, and it's disintegrating. Presently, in the universe of the deep space, there's a micro energy that's been given off by stars. It's spread out through the whole universe, and the average temperature is microwave radiation is about 2.7 degrees. When all the stars burn out, this energy that they have will be spread out, and the temperature of deep space will rise up to about 4 degrees from absolute zero. Let me tell you let me tell you what absolute zero is, how cold that is. It's the lowest temperature in the universe. Some have called it the third law of thermodynamics. There's no temperature below absolute zero. It's about minus 470 degrees Fahrenheit, 460 degrees below Fahrenheit, and it's, the centigrade is about 270 degrees. And we use the scale of Kelvin, absolute measures from this absolute temperature down, and everything's above that. We're in this room, we're about 300 degrees Kelvin above absolute zero. And we live, by the way, God's given us a great world. You don't have to walk around in a spacesuit like you would on the moon or any place else in the universe, and it's the right amount of oxygen and everything. This is a finely developed system. We tried to, in the space program, tried to develop domes so that people can live on Mars or the moon, get the right balance of plants and get this symbiotic relationship between plants and animals so you keep the right amount of oxygen and CO2 and water. Well, finally, these things never worked out. We have a system that is working, but we couldn't reverse engineer it. They had to get those people out of there after so much time before they died of either lack of water or a lack of oxygen. We still haven't developed a system where you could live where everything bursts up sunlight and just keeps recycling stuff. But this is called the quality law, and it states that there's always more disorder of matter and energy after any interaction than before. The quality or the order of matter and energy in the universe always decreases. That's why we have friction, free exchange of gases. You have to keep pumping this expensive gas into your car. If this law were true, it would fuel up once and run forever. And but it goes into friction. Air gets stirred up. You put on your brakes. It goes into heats the brakes. Goes out and goes into the atmosphere, and eventually to the universe. So this is what the second law. It's the quality law. If we plotted it, it would look like this. Here we are at the present time, and at some point it runs downhill. This is the point at which it will only be at 4 degrees above absolute zero. Where at some point we've used up so much of the total that was useful, and we've got so much left. The problem is we don't know the decay curve. This is an exponential decay. The hotter the suns are, the more energy they give off. And toward the end, they'll either explode or peter out. So this is, if you graph this, and this is the useful energy and matter in the universe. Interesting point. If you go back in time, you come to a point here in the past where you have the useful amount of energy is equal to the total energy. We're going to get into the problems with that. You can't have more useful energy in the past than total. It proves that we're going to show that this proves that the universe began a finite time ago. Now again, we don't know enough about the curve to determine how long ago that was, but it's definite as far as the beginning of the universe. The first law only gives us two possibilities. One, the universe is eternal. Matter and energy has always been there. And that's one of the options. The other option is the universe was supernaturally created by an external agent. Those are the only two options philosophically or logically that you have for this, the implications of the first law. The second law eliminates the eternal universe possibility. As we saw in it, you can't have more useful energy than total energy. Also, you can't jump from total randomness up to that point and then begin running downhill. Also, you could, we'll get into that a little bit more. The other possibility is that all the energy in the universe was in one particle just moving in one direction. That's not possible either, because it'll start giving off its energy and radiation or hitting other things and begins a very sharp decline. The second law eliminates, since the universe is not eternal, but it began a finite time ago, and is now dying irreversibly, incapable of naturally giving itself order. This law, by the way, is pretty depressing. So we are left with only one viable conclusion. The universe was supernaturally created, first law, and that it was ordered by an external agent a finite time ago. Those are the only conclusions that you have to this law. The second law requires, this is interesting from a scientific point of view, certain things about this external agent. One, it has to be supernaturally creating the universe out of nothing, because it's not eternal. Supernaturally gave the universe its order, all these stars and everything, which are burning out. Additionally, the external agent must have these characteristics. More energy than the universe to give the universe its order. For instance, you remember Joshua said, take it back in time to its point. Take our sun back in time. It was more ordered yesterday, and it goes back to a point of beginning. Well, then it's giving off this energy. But to take it back to that point, you have to put more order and energy into the sun, our sun, from which it became, than it'll ever give off in its whole lifetime, where it's all of its energy spread out. And if you do it for one star, our sun, you have to do it for all the stars, because they're giving off energy. They're all dying. But to take it back to their point of origin, it takes more energy, this agent, to create a star than it does to, the same amount of energy that it'll give off in its whole lifetime. So you have to have, not to create the universe, but just to give it its order, you have to have more energy than the whole universe contains, all the stars in the galaxy contain, to take them back to their origin point from which they came. So the agent has to have more energy than the whole universe. It must be immaterial. Why this is true is that matter cannot travel faster than the speed of light. And if we can see out there what Einstein would say, 20 billion light years, it's actually 10 to the 23rd kilometers from here, and starts putting stars together and coming this way, those will be dead before it gets here. In other words, traveling at the speed of light. So we look at the whole universe in every direction. We see every day or so, we see a star falling out of our own galaxy in every direction. So they all begin about the same time. And we see occasionally, once a year, what we call supernova. They're outside of our galaxy, the Milky Way. And Milky Way has about 200 billion stars. It's somewhere out there. We don't know if it's a whole galaxy blowing up or superstars in other galaxies. But in this process, when they die, you have to take them back, and this agent would have to not be made out of matter to travel across the universe and create these things all at the same time. You see, if it's made out of matter, so it can't be made out of something. Someone says, well, it's the Big Bang when it was all together. And you say, hey, the temperatures in your theoretical Big Bang are so hot, no matter can exist. Your temperatures are so hot. I don't know if you know that if you heat matter up and take it back, You start with frozen states, then you go to liquid states, then you go to gaseous states, then you go to plasma states, and then pretty soon you don't have any states at all. It's so hot that matter can't exist, it's all disintegrated and spread out thin. So this agent can't be made out of matter, because it's either travel faster than the speed of light, it has to travel faster than the speed of light, or it has to exist under conditions that are too hot. That's where this is what, to exist before the Big Bang Theory. It has to be more complex than man, the most complex part of the universe. This comes back to what we call information theory. It's like, for instance, you have a watch. The watchmaker or the watch factory has to be more complex than the watch that it produces. Everything that's produced must have an agent that's more complex than it to produce it. Simple things can't produce complex things. And that also comes out of the second law. So, and that's well, some people believe in aliens, I don't. But in any case, this agent that created the universe has to be more complex than the most complex part of the universe. As far as we know, that's us. So, this agent has to have will, intellect, feelings, be more complex than we are. And then well, put these together. More energy than the universe, not made out of matter, and more complex than man. And at this point, we probably use the G word, God. He's the only the supernatural agent with the attributes of God fulfills all these requirements. By the way, this is not religion. This is not philosophy. This is hardcore science. I was once speaking, I had some friends, I was working on a project in Africa, on Lake Victoria, with the World Bank. And so friends, I explained to them these laws and some of the implications of them. Well, they're not just they don't know anything about science. I might be just blowing smoke to them. So the next day we were out on the campus at George Washington University. And it was about noontime, and this one guy disappeared. He came back and he said, meeting for us at noon. And I thought it was a luncheon deal or something like that. So we go in, and it's a lecture hall at George Washington University, with one of those with the round, with the blackboard down in front and everything. And so I said, well, I thought it was for lunch. He says, no, it's a meeting here. So about 5 minutes later, we're sitting down in the front row, and this professor walks in. He comes over and he says, look, Mr. Penny has some ideas I'd like for you to critique, because I don't know about science. And it turns out he's not only just a professor of physics, he's the head of the department. He's got about 70 years old. He says, so I present these. I drill the first law. I'm not spending much time. He's not a freshman at the school. And then I draw the second law, graphed just like you saw. And then I start the proposal. At this point, this guy explodes. This man jumps out of the seat. He says, I know where you're going with this. I know where you're going with this. You're going to talk about religion or philosophy. This is the heart and core of science. These laws are not, there's not even philosophy or religion in these laws. This is physics. And he just throws out of the place. And my friend just sat there in shock. He says, he knows what the implications of these laws are, doesn't he? And about this time, the door opened up, and he says, you're going to try to force me to teach something I do not believe, and I'm not going to do it. And he slammed the door and walked out. The thing is people at the higher levels know some of the implications, just like Jasper. You heard his testimony. I know what the laws are saying, but I cannot accept it because I'm an agnostic. And we don't fit into our worldview, even though the science says those things. So these are things that are hardcore. Just about 4 years ago, through unusual circumstances, I was invited to China to speak to the Chinese Academy of Science. It's the highest level that they have. And also at Tsinghua University, which is their equivalent of MIT there. Well, in this meeting at the Academy of Sciences, these are the top scientists in China. And the place was packed. It wasn't quite as big as this, but I mean, people on the walls and everything else. And the translation, it takes twice as long to explain these laws as they tonight. So I'm going through this thing, this kind of whole, first of all, they found that I was trained in these laws by Chin. And so this discussion between my translator, Chin, and that's the right Chin. Then they look at me like, you were trained by Chin? and then as I explain this, you can see in their faces, oh, what's this American telling us? We already know these laws. But then when I graft them and superimpose them, everything changes. Because all of them are Communist Party members, and you have to be an atheist to be a Communist Party member. And they're looking at these things, and the conclusion is that there was a supernatural creation, and the characteristics of the Creator. Everything was silent. It was just like, you can see, there must be something the matter with his reasoning. It wasn't a question whether the laws are true, but they never really got the things together. This is hard evidence that you have in apologetics for divine creation and of the very nature of God. And it's hard science. It's not a religious thing. It's not a philosophy. And these are the conclusions. I want you to hear, this is a man named Sanford. He was at one time probably the world's best applied geneticist. He was at Cornell, and I got to meet him in unusual circumstances. And he developed what we call the genes gun, all these instruments for genetic engineering. He had the patents for them. Well, he made a fortune for Cornell. Anyway, got to meet him, and he was forced. He had believed, like he told me, he was an atheist. He was told that he believed that what he called the prime axiom of life is that life arose by artificial mutations and held up there by natural selection. He says natural selection won't create anything. It just holds it up once it's formed. And he says, we can count all the genes. We know the genomes of these plants and things. And he developed systems where, like soybeans, used to be, they get a whiff of some herbicide a mile away and the whole leaves fell off. Well, he goes in and they manipulate and change these so that you can go out and spray soybeans with herbicides. Kills all the plants, but leaves the soybeans. Well, he developed those tools, the genes gun and all these things. And he's created them all, and we've never seen a beneficial mutation. Period. Secondly, he says, even if we created one by this genes gun and everything, we cannot use natural selection to just throw it out there and let it grow. He says, we have to pick it out. And he says, none of that is true. And he says, I was faced with very serious problems. This thing, we're living in a workshop, a divine workshop that's created the world around us. And he said, I had to teach him. And even to this day, he is now a young earth creationist. Can you believe that? And he speaks at the national conferences, and it's pretty clear about what the problem. But listen to what he has to say. This man became a believer.
The problem is so fundamental that just increasing selection pressure does not solve it. It doesn't even come close to solving it. This is the essence of aging. And so one of the things that Michael Lynch in his recent paper mentioned is he said, because of the nature of this degenerative process in our body, there is no prospect for any type of scientific breakthrough to significantly extend our lifespan beyond what it is. That's really fundamental, and it's very personal because we are experiencing genetic entropy personally. No one can contest that. Personal genetic entropy is an uncontestable fact that no scientist on the planet can deny because it is why we die. And so what's happening is every gene in every chromosome of every cell in my body is mutated. And so that guarantees my aging and my death. But the problem is that these mutations accumulated in my body, some of them are transmitted to my children. And so, in fact, I take the genes, all the mutations that I inherited from my ancestors, just tens of thousands of deleterious mutations in my body, and then I add my own contribution to that, about 100 new mutations, at least, and pass it on to the next generation. So what we have here is not only this deep, the kind of personal tragedy that what caused us to die, but it's passed on to our children. So it's a tragedy for all of humanity, and it keeps getting worse. It means that we are perishing people living in a dying world. And that is so profound, and so it makes the need for salvation and Savior so personal and so immediate. There's no circle of life where things just keep staying the same. It's not an upward spiral of evolution, things keep getting better and better. It is a downward spiral, exactly as described in Scripture. And so it's, my research, I thought would, I realized it had major implications for evolution, but I had I couldn't have guessed how profound the biblical implications are, how profoundly the evidence supports the biblical perspective of a dying universe and a dying world, and that we are dying because of the fall, and that we desperate our only hope is Christ.
Amen.
See, these are the stunning conclusions of one of the best men of science, probably one of the best in genetics in the world. And he's telling us the truth. This, I asked him one time, I said, we talked late tonight, and I said, Doctor, I said, what is the, how long has this process been going on? Well, he says, at the present rate, we can take all the genomes around the world, and they point back. Every human gets their egg from their mother. And he says, and so we took all the humans, or spot check on the world, go back, and he says, we come back to one woman. I said, about 300 generations back, he says, at the present rates of the generation of the genome. And he says, in conferences, we call her the mitochondrial Eve. They don't believe in Eve, but they say that we go back to one woman, all the humans. And he says, every man gets his Y chromosome from his father. And we did the same thing, and they trace those back to what they call Y chromosome Adam. And he said, they don't believe in Adam. I said, again, 300 generations? He says, yeah. I said, well, how long into the future can this process continue? Well, at the present rates, and it seems to be accelerating, because some groups by intermarriage wipe themselves out. He says it's among animals too. And he says, we've lost probably 99% of the species that ever existed in the geological record. We're down to 1%, we're part of that, and it's disappearing. And I said, well, what are we talking about? And he says, well, if you put 20 years per generation, you're talking about 6,000 years. He says, probably in that amount of time, there won't be any humans on the face of the earth. In other words, before our sun blows up and a nova gets down to the point where it can't continue on and blows up, there won't even be life here to observe it. And I did this speaking to the Academy of Sciences. I drove it home. I said, listen, this second law is not a matter of polite scientific discussion or parlor talk. I said, this is one that affects us all. And it's taking us all down. Not only our sun and the physical world, it's taking down the whole biological realm, and especially people. And I closed with this. I quoted Shakespeare. I said, Beth, it says, life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury and signifying nothing. I said, that's the scientific view of life. And I said, but I don't leave you without hope. I said, the only known exception that I know of, or anyone else's, the only exception to this law was the resurrection of Christ from the dead. And I said, apart from that hope, you might as well go out and get drunk and kill yourself from a scientific point of view. But I said, there is hope. And in my talk at the Kevin Science on this, stone, they didn't even have any questions. I mean, it's so hard to think. What do you do with it? And if we realize from a scientific point of view, but the interesting thing is, where did this come from? These two laws. The first law, Genesis 1 and 2. The second law, Genesis 3. And the only thing that's going to save us from this is, again, the redemption that he's going to work in bringing the whole, reversing this whole thing in the eternal state. And the word gracious, it seems alone, because what happened is he created a perfect world. When sin entered in with the fall of man, he withdrew his maintenance of this perpetual machine. Suns would have burned out before, people would have died, animals would have died, would have continued forever. But he withdrew that. It's a gracious thing, like I said, because we don't have to live in a state of perpetual sin. But the whole universe is going down. And then he, as we'll see in the last deal, there's a hope. I don't want to end on a real negative note, but these laws, God has a jagged sense of humor to put all of science in the first three chapters of Genesis, which everyone laughs and says, there's no historicity here. There's no science in this thing. It's fairy tales and myths. I said, no. If you want to understand science, you better understand these two laws from their origin. And by chance of me, you can use it. He didn't explain to me their origin, but now I know. And now you know. Yeah, questions? Which might have. Yes. The question is, some of the aspects of the second law existed before the fall. Some people would say that, like the digestion of food, of friction, so you don't slide every place. But that's not true. You don't need friction to walk around. Friction is sliding energy that's dissipating. You can have ideal states. You can digest food under ideal states, where you disassemble the food and put it back together without any entropy. So it didn't necessarily for life to have existed, and it will exist in the future the same way, in the eternal state. People will be able to eat like Christ did, fish and things, and it's an ideal state, and it doesn't degenerate, and it doesn't be death, and it's not on the downhill run. So, yeah, that's true. It's easy that it's hard to imagine a world without the second law, but that's because we lived in it for so long. But these, like I said, the second law is it's of every interaction, like Jim explained to me. This affects everything. We have order in matter, and that's why we don't have perfect crystals, by the way. There's no crystal that's perfect, because it's got all these few imperfections in it because of this law.
So Sanford in the genetics said that we go back to the mitochondrial Eve and the atom 300 generations ago, and if it's 20 years per generation, that means that the Adam and Eve, the start, was 6,000 years ago.
Yeah, that's like around that. Yeah, that's about. It's a question of how fast the rates are working. He thinks it's over 100, and everyone bases that. Some try and stretch it out to only 50, and he says that's just not realistic. And they would extend the time out to 50,000 years, but he says that doesn't work out.
You're talking about bad mutations.
Right.
We generate in our lifetime, I'm going to generate 100 bad ones, and I've passed those already on to my kids.
Your parents were more perfect than you were. Yeah.
And the grandparents more.
And
That's how they realize all that stuff. You know, you all the older folks, you got memories, I can't remember that.
Well, let me tell you an interesting thing. What's interesting is Adam, God made all the animals and wanted to. They're about 100 times more than we have today. Okay? Because a lot of them become extinct. And he remembered them all until the time of Moses, because the mankind's memory was declining. They knew everything, they could pass it on. Adam lived to what? Almost the time of Methuselah and things like that. So you have the ability to pass things on. Everyone knew everything, and the memories were great. But you'll see this decline, and obviously not only days, but I see it with other people. Have you ever read any theological works written in the 1800s? Woo! They'll blow your head off. These guys quote in 6 or 7 different languages, and they don't give you a translation. They assume that you can read in Greek, and Latin, and Hebrew, and German, and French, and English. And you say, where do those people get that? But there's been that much decline, and you'll see it in health conditions. And Stanford wrote a book called Genetic Entropy, and he points out some of these things that are pure. Our health is going down. Our diseases like things like diabetes, and a bunch of other things are increasing in our population. And like he said, some populations have intermarried to such and they don't exist anymore. He says it would arrive in animals. That's why they try and get a diversity in zoos of the genes of their tribes and everything else, so that they can, if you spread it over a number and get a good variety, then you can sustain it. With a huge population, we decrease that. And if you get in a small population, you'll go down real fast.
Other comments? Back here, yes. Is Jim a Christian now?
No, we're still good friends, but I talked to him. He was out at Stanford. He was at Yale. He was a Nobel Prize, Rhodes Scholar, and went to Oxford, and then he was a distinguished professor at Yale, and then at Stanford. And one of my sons went there, and we went out there to interview and talk to him and his wife. She's Chinese too, and she said, "This is unbelievable discussion." I said, "I learned the laws from Dick." I said, "But he just didn't explain to me the implications." And he was a little bit embarrassed by it, but I said, but he knew the implications, he knows the implications, but he's never become a believer, unfortunately. He's a great guy, bright, very bright fellow. Well,
6,000 if Jesus doesn't come back, according to Stanford, in a 20-year generations.
yeah, the problem is that the decline accelerates toward the end. That's the problem of entropy.
Okay, back row. Where do they get off thinking we were just stupid cavemen?
Hey, let me tell you what that's an interesting thing. You know, I like languages. One time I could read 7 or 8 different languages. The languages are going downhill. Let me give you Greek, for instance. Classical Greek is better than Koine, which our scriptures are written in, which is better than Byzantine Greek, which is better than modern Greek. You can see it in English. I can read English, King James, because it distinguishes between these and thous and all kinds of views, and we don't just use you. Sometimes we say you all to distinguish world. We can't distinguish between all those. We see a definite decline in our English language.
Ray, sir? Word?
Yeah, what should happen?
Where do you come up with 20 years as the
Average for a generation. Let me tell you, and it's looking into some of this when we talk about ice age, that people, like I said, lived 900 years before, and they that decline because of the radiation and everything that came about, the decline of the waters above. Those years are longer, but the people also live longer. And but it's fairly uniform for those periods of time. The time from the birth of the Father to the birth of the Son, and the years after that, those are fairly uniform. Anyway, they are in what we call the Septuagint, the translation from the Hebrew into 300 years before Christ. Those are very uniform. The one that ours is translated in Masoretic, it was written probably 500 years after Christ, the Hebrew text. They use different ones, but there's reasons for that. So people can have, if you're going to live 900 years, I was putting have children 150 years old.
Okay, I got a question right there in front of the red shirt. Okay, I couldn't hear that.
So we all came from Eve. At what point were populations formed before they started declining?
Populations formed before they began to decline.
Yeah, there's some questions about how many people existed before the flood, for instance, from Adam and Eve to the time of the flood. And it depends. It's not altogether. There could have been millions of people, actually. It doesn't take long in this exponential decay. If you have 5 or 6 children, it grows pretty fast. The first part is not very fast, but after that, it blows up into huge numbers. For instance, you can even see in in my lifetime, we've gone from probably 2 or 3 billion people on the earth to 7 already now, in a matter of what, 70 years or something, almost 80 years. So if you have health and there's not a bunch of people dying, and infant deaths and mortality is greatly decreased, and things just grow up. And so they could have had a lot of people before the flood, and then in certain populations between disease and wars and everything, and that keeps our populations down quite a bit from what they would. It was estimated in the last century that one person in the last century in 20 that ever lived was alive in the last century.
I'm not sure we answered your question. Yes or no? Come up afterward.
Yeah, I'm trying to
Anybody
articulate.
Wait, hold there. Anybody else? Anybody else? Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay, go back here. Ed has a question. Because you guys had a chance. The truth about climate change. Here we go. Is that biblical?
If we would get into that, I always laugh. I was a city commissioner in North Kansas, if you can believe that. And one time, I had all the people off the hill up there getting me in trouble because they knew where I was on my beliefs and things. Well, I came back on them on this issue. I said, well, don't they teach biology and chemistry at the University of Kansas anymore? They said, what do you mean? What do you mean? And I said, well, you're concerned about these burning of coal. Oh yeah, that's the main problem, main fossil fuel. And I said, well, you're burning coal. Do you know what coal is? It's carbonized plant material. I said, what are those? We have 20 times more argon in our atmosphere than we have CO2. I said, and CO2 is the heart of the biological systems. These plants convert that into energy supply and things that animals, we can't live without plants and their photosynthesis. We'll die. And so we eat plants so we have energy that we can live. And then we give off CO2 and they take in CO2 and put oxygen for us. It's a symbiotic relationship. I said, don't they teach these things up at the university anymore? And CO2, water is the name of the game with the weather, by the way. The weather, it has a much higher absorption band than CO2 ever had. The dry gases are they're not even on the equation. They don't even come up with weather. And the reason our weather comes from really geothermal effects. All atoms break down except for maybe iron and helium. And when they do that, they give off a lot of energy in the earth. And it's like, yeah, every planet, everything we have out there, Jupiter, everyone gives off more energy than they got from the sun. because of this decay. And it comes up from beneath, not from the sun. No, the sun doesn't have a lens that focuses on this place where you have a leaf lens. As it goes across the sky, these are coming up from below. The ocean would represent about 70-75% of our surface, and they're coming up from beneath this geothermal. And that heats up the oceans, and that creates our weather. It looks like they're 13-year cycles to some degree. When I was a kid, they were always complaining in the 50s that we're going into the deep freeze, we're going to die, this and that, and they all everything's going to burn up, global warming. Well, everything from the satellites, we've been cooling down since 1998, the oceans and Earth. Land, except the cities, of course, they run about 5 degrees higher. So I said, there's no science to this. I'm trying to figure out what this, there's a political agenda to this, to try to force us into, I think, electric deals which they can control. They can't control fossil fuels and things like that. But fossil fuels, carbon doesn't remain in the atmosphere very long. And it's not heating, it doesn't create a greenhouse effect. Water will, but it's much more massive. But that's only when you got clouds, which traps it. There's no greenhouse effect of CO2. This is all myth. They got a political agenda. It's not a scientific agenda.
So you're saying that the change in temperatures on the Earth are primarily happening because of these under ocean features that are giving off this energy that's coming up, and not what we're doing here on the Earth.
No. What happened big and night changes of temperature from the sun? The long-term deals have to do with this geothermal coming out, and it has to do with water cycles, and it's got to get rid of the energy once it comes up and hits the oceans. There's a couple companies I work with. One of them, it used to be called Strategic Weather, and they plan this stuff for the invasions in Normandy and things like that. It was professors from MIT, and what they did is they could predict the weather out for a year to a year and a half. If you just take the averages, you'll get about 30%. They can get 80, for a particular day, they can get 80%, but it'll be a year from now. The temperature and the rainfall. If you give them a week, they're up to 95%. If you give them a month, they're 99% predicting a year out. Because the oceans are like a thermal flywheel. They don't change. And so that as they're heated, they'll give off this energy. And water has a huge capacity, specific heat we call it, to do this. So it's like a giant flywheel. It doesn't change quickly, the temperatures. And it comes up through these volcanoes in the Pacific Ocean particularly, and it's around these rims, the ring of fire in the Pacific Ocean. You get some in the Atlantic, but not as much. So these things are, it's like they haven't studied this stuff. This is stuff not new. It's just that they propagandize because they've eliminated any dissident voices in academia. Unfortunately, you don't have any. They just, over a period of time, just got them kicked off the faculty. The smartest people we have out there in the scientific community are not in academia. And some of them don't even have PhDs. Some of these wizards in electronics and things like that, they're charged. None of these professors can do anything. In electrification, they can't touch these guys. I'm sorry.
Another question, then we'll get to homework. Oh, okay. Right, back over here. Go ahead.
No.
Can you believe in evolution at all? How about adaptation within times?
Well, you can have, for instance, our genetic code, they always delegate, they used to delegate about 95% of DNA as a consequence of evolution. Now we're finding out that everything in there is useful. And we've got DNA in there that is for things that will never arrive. For instance, DuPont was developing nylon in the Hudson River upstream from New York City. It ended up in the river, and it's an artificial chemical. But there's bacteria now that can eat it. How did they learn to eat it? Because it's programmed those things. We got things programmed into us to deal with diseases and things we've never faced. So it didn't evolve. It's not junk DNA. It didn't evolve, and we didn't evolve. I didn't come from an egg. And I think if anything happened, if you want to believe in de-evolution, where apes came from men and this type of thing, like viruses are obviously they came out of living systems at one time. Because they can't live alone, they can't reproduce and things like that. But they're very viable if they get into a living system. They're incomplete. And so they are degenerative forms. So everything's going downhill, not going uphill.
Yes.
It just can't happen. I used to be an evolutionist. I got killed.
Okay. So, clarification on my question, the 20-year average. According to Matthew, there are 42 generations from Adam to Jesus. According to the genealogy calculation, that's roughly 4,004 years. So a little bit less than 100 years per generation. And then Moses, they want our wilderness for a generation, about 40. Jesus says all these things on this generation, it happens within 40. So we've got 100 initially, 40. To some extent, that builds out the exponential curve. How do we get to 20 years per generation times 300 to get to 6,000? The 300 seems like a fair number, and 20 seems kind of made up.
Well, that's because basically that's what exists today, 20 generations. Is an average over the whole world. It could have been longer in the past. I'm not saying that it isn't. The very interesting things, we don't have time to go into it, but there are like in Luke 3, mentions Cain, and he says either in Genesis 11 or in 1 Chronicles 1, but he appears in the Septuagint. And so there's a discrepancy between what our Bible's translated on those genealogies. There were longer periods of time. But the generation could be anything. But where it's used in the scriptures is generally, somewhere between 20 and 30 years.
Okay, we are handing out next week's lesson plan. Next week, we're going to talk about the flood. And next week, at least all of the students that are here are going to receive some fossils, real fossils, if you come, and they'll get to keep them. And maybe we'll have enough fossils for the adults, but I'm not sure about that. So that's what we're going to have next week. It's great. If I know some of you don't have a lesson plan, but at the top, we'd like for you to read your Bibles again, chapters 6 through 9. And some of you have that memorized, but it won't hurt to go over it again because you'll pick up things that you didn't know. The answers book has a lot in it. There's 3 questions in the answers book we'd like you to look at if you have time. Questions 10, 11, and 12 are all about the flood, so that would be good for you. And then in big blue, this one, we've got about 15 or 20 pages in here. Notice it says global flood on the title of the book, so you think it might be about the flood. So that's available to you in your books. And then Dave is going to talk about the videos that you can watch on our website, genesisacademy.net. If you're watching Dave's videos, he's got 60 minutes on the flood there. Pick up some stuff that we won't talk about here, I'm sure. Now tonight, students, we have a book that is a devotional book for students, for every student, if you want them to have it. So if you've got kids and you only want one for the family, that's fine. But we're saying they all can have their own book. This is a devotional book. And we've been giving this out for several years. And what it does is it takes a day-by-day calendar, or you can do it by topic. But for example, I've just opened up to June 23rd, and we have on the left side, we have an article about biology, so something in biology. It's talking about single cells. And at the bottom, we have a beautiful picture, and then we have a scripture. And so for every day, this is on flood geology over on the right-hand side over here. And then we have a scripture. So you can can use this as a devotional. So as parents with children, you can use this every day, one of these a day, and go through it. Or if you want to look at all the stuff on biology, thumb through it and find all the biology comments. There's about 30 different topics, from theology to biology to chemistry to whatever. And it's a very good book. If you're a Sunday school teacher or you're church leadership and you have 8th grade graduation or high school graduation, you want to think about buying this book for those kids or people that are graduating or some other things. So there's a lot of opportunity here. So they're out on the table, and next week it's going to be, it's another judgment, but it's very interesting. We have some great videos and things, and we're going to get some live fossils, and that's pretty interactive next week. So come back, and we're going to get out of here just a little bit early tonight. And thank you for your patience, and the sound was better, wasn't it? Thank you.
Yes,
Ed.
thank you.
Up there. Right out there. Thank you. We appreciate it. All right, we'll see you next week. Come back. It's a good one.
Good night. God bless.